Character: Marcus Reed, 29 years old. Part 1. The Fire That Refused to Die. They told me I was broken, a mistake, a nobody destined to live in the shadows. I heard it in every whispered conversation behind my back, in the disgusted looks from neighbors, even in the cold tone of my own mother's voice. "Marcus, you'll never make it out of this gutter," she spat one night, the words heavier than any chain. "Stop dreaming!" I wanted to scream, to shout back that I was more than the dirt-stained hands and worn-out clothes. But instead, I swallowed the rage and hid my trembling fists beneath the tattered sleeves of my jacket. We lived in a cramped apartment on the worst side of Detroit, a place where hope came in whispers and despair hung in the air like smoke. My father left when I was 10, and my mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Most nights I went to bed hungry, the ache gnawing at my stomach as if it could devour my spirit too. School wasn't sanctuary, it was a battleground. Teachers dismissed me as lazy or stupid, classmates laughed at my torn backpack and beaten shoes. "Why don't you just disappear, Marcus?" one of them sneered once, shoving me against a locker. The laughter that followed burned into my skin. But even in the darkest moments, I found small sparks of light. Books borrowed from the library, stories of warriors, inventors, people who had clawed their way out of nothing. I clung to them like lifelines. One day, when I was 16, I walked into the school counselor's office, clutching a folded piece of paper. My first ever drawing, a design for an engine that could revolutionize fuel efficiency. I hoped for encouragement. Instead, he looked at me with a sigh. "Marcus, you're wasting your time. No one from your background ends up in engineering." His words shattered something inside me. I left that office with tears stinging my eyes, the paper crumpled in my fist. For weeks I slipped into silence, my dreams retreating behind walls of doubt. Depression crept in slowly, a heavy fog settling over every day. I'd lie awake, heart pounding, stomach empty, wondering if I was fooling myself. Every small failure, missed bus, forgotten homework, cold dinners, piled on, suffocating. One night, I found myself standing in the freezing rain, soaked to the bone, tears mixing with raindrops. I whispered to the night air, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm nothing." But then, from somewhere deep inside, a stubborn voice cracked through the silence. "No, you are not nothing." That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let the world define me. I would fight. Not with fists, but with every ounce of will I had. I started working odd jobs after school, cleaning floors, delivering pizzas, anything to save a little money. At night, I taught myself engineering from old textbooks, online forums, anything I could find. I faced ridicule from friends who said I was chasing ghosts, from family who shook their heads, muttering I was wasting time. "Give it up, Marcus," my uncle warned. "Life's not for dreamers like you." But I refused to give up. I turned every insult into fuel, every setback into a lesson. One evening, after scrubbing a grimy diner floor until my knees bled, I sat alone under a flickering streetlight and sketched out a new engine prototype. The cold bit at my fingers, but my hands moved with fierce determination. This was more than a machine. It was my rebellion, my proof that I could rise. Years blurred into sleepless nights, relentless work, and tiny breakthroughs. I watched friends drift away, replaced by mentors I found in online communities, engineers who saw potential where others saw failure. At 22, I built my first working prototype in my tiny garage, using salvaged parts and pure grit. It was crude, imperfect, but it worked. The moment the engine hummed to life, a surge of triumph crashed through me. I wasn't broken, I was alive, I was powerful. But the journey was far from over. The world outside was still cold and cruel. I knew the hardest battles were ahead. Part 2. The Betrayal That Broke Me. The buzz of my phone woke me up before dawn, the screen flashing with a message that would change everything. "Marcus, we need to talk. Meet me at the office at 9 a.m. Jason was my business partner, the one person I trusted above all. Together we had poured sweat and hope into our startup, trying to revolutionize the energy industry with my engine prototype. We had scraped every dollar, faced endless rejection from investors, and clung to a shared dream that felt impossible to reach. But that message, it didn't feel like hope. It felt like a trap. The day started grey and cold, the kind of morning that pressed heavy on your chest. I arrived at our tiny office, heart hammering, to find the place eerily empty, except for Jason, sitting stiffly behind the desk, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't look at me. "Marcus," he said finally, voice clipped. "I'm sorry. I've signed the papers. The board agreed. You're out." My mind froze, a brutal punch twisting my insides. "What? Why? We built this together." Jason's jaw tightened. "Investors want a more marketable face. You're too raw. It's business, not charity. You understand, don't you?" The betrayal crashed down like a tidal wave. This wasn't just losing a job. It was losing everything I'd fought for, the dream I'd nurtured through sleepless nights and endless setbacks. I staggered out of the office, the city's harsh noise like a mocking chorus. The world that once seemed full of possibility was suddenly cold and unforgiving. For days, I drifted through a fog of hopelessness. Every knock at my door felt like a threat, every glance a judgment. Hunger gnawed at me. Nights were spent curled on a couch too small, surrounded by crumpled sketches and broken dreams. The harsh winter crept into my bones, and the loneliness was suffocating. I'd stare into the cracked mirror, voice hollow when I whispered, "Why bother? Why fight when they all want me gone?" One evening I found myself wandering the streets, rain soaking my coat, hands trembling. The city lights blurred through tears. I felt invisible, erased. But amid that darkness, a faint ember still burned inside. The next day, in a coffee shop, I overheard a conversation between two strangers talking about innovation, how the bold rewrite the future. Something stirred. I pulled out a notebook and began scribbling again. Ideas, dreams, plans. I realized that losing Jason, losing the company, was a brutal lesson. But not the end. I was not defined by others' betrayals. I was defined by my own refusal to quit. It was time to rebuild. From the ashes of betrayal, I would rise. I swallowed the bitterness, locked away the pain, and set my jaw. This time I would fight alone. No one would decide my worth but me. And with that fierce resolve, I walked back into the storm, ready to face whatever came next. Part 3. From the ashes, I rose. The nights spent hunched over blueprints in my cramped apartment turned into months, then years. I became a shadow of relentless determination, working when the world slept, sacrificing everything for a vision only I could see. The ache of betrayal never fully left me, but it fueled the fire burning in my chest. Every failed prototype, every investor door slammed in my face was a brutal reminder of what I had to prove. I started small, fixing engines for neighbors, taking freelance gigs, anything that kept me afloat and close to my dream. Slowly, the pieces fell into place. I developed a new model, more efficient, more affordable. This time, I partnered cautiously, wary of repeating past mistakes. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A tech incubator heard about my work and offered me seed funding. It wasn't much, but it was enough to build credibility. Then the first major investor meeting. I remember walking into that glass-walled boardroom, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Faces watched me, waiting for me to fail, but I didn't. I spoke with fire and precision, laying out not just the mechanics of my engine, but the vision for a cleaner, sustainable future. When I finished, silence hung in the air, then one by one, nods. Handshakes. I had arrived. The deals flowed. Media attention followed. The scrappy kid from Detroit became a name whispered in boardrooms and headlines. Then came the moment I dreaded and anticipated in equal measure, the reunion. At a gala celebrating green innovations, I saw them. My old classmates, the teachers who ignored me, the neighbors who mocked my family. Their eyes widened when they recognized me, the boy they wrote off now dressed in tailored suits, exuding confidence. Some approached with tentative smiles, others with veiled envy. "Marcus, I didn't expect—" "Congratulations," my former school counselor said, voice strained. A classmate muttered, "Guess you really did make it." And Jason, the man who betrayed me, stood at the edge, watching, his face unreadable. Inside, emotions churned. Part of me craved to call them out, to remind them of the nights I cried alone, the ridicule I endured. But instead, I smiled, cold but genuine. I said, "Thank you, it wasn't easy." The past no longer controlled me. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it meant reclaiming my peace. That night, as I left the gala, the city lights shimmering around me, I felt whole. The boy who was broken, discarded, and doubted had become a man who dared to dream and win. I was no longer a victim of their judgments. I was the architect of my own destiny. Part 4. The weight of success and the price of trust. The applause and spotlight were intoxicating at first, but success carried its own heavy chains. Suddenly, every decision, every word was scrutinized. People wanted a piece of the man who had risen from nothing, but very few knew the cost behind the achievement. I spent nights awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by the silence left behind by those who once called me friend. Jason's betrayal wasn't just a business lesson, it became a dark shadow over my ability to trust. Every handshake felt like a gamble, every partnership a potential knife in the back. One evening, sitting alone in my high-rise apartment, overlooking the city that had once ignored me, I felt the weight of it all. I reached for my phone, scrolling through messages and missed calls. Some from old friends who suddenly wanted to reconnect, others from new business associates. But what I craved most was simplicity, the simple days before all the noise, before the smiles turned calculating. I whispered to myself, is this what it means to win? To lose everything that made it real? The loneliness was suffocating, but the fire inside refused to die. I reminded myself why I started, not for fame, not for fortune, but to prove to that scared, hungry boy that he mattered. So I began building something beyond business, a foundation to help kids from neighborhoods like mine, kids who faced the same ridicule and hunger. I met with educators, community leaders, and former skeptics. Slowly, the walls I had built around my heart began to crack. One day I received a letter from my mother. It was brief, almost formal. Marcus, I heard about your work. I'm proud. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. My fingers trembled as I read it. Years of bitterness warred with the hope buried deep inside. I didn't know if I could forgive yet, but I knew one thing. I was ready to face the past, not as a victim, but as a man who chose his own future. The next step wasn't just about success. It was about healing. And this time, I would do it on my own terms. Part 5. Closing the circle, opening new doors. The road to forgiveness isn't a straight line. It twists, it turns, and sometimes it feels like you're walking backward just to move forward. But I learned that holding on to anger only chained me to the past, the very thing I fought so hard to escape. One chilly morning, I stood outside the community center we'd built in my old neighborhood, a place where kids could learn, dream, and find refuge from the harsh world I once knew. The plaque bore my name, but this wasn't about me anymore. It was about legacy. As I watched a group of teenagers laughing and tinkering with solar panels, I thought about my father's harsh words that once crushed me. You're a failure. Today, those words echoed differently. They no longer defined me. Not the ridicule from neighbors, not the betrayals, not the endless nights of hunger and cold. I had transformed my pain into power. My mother came to visit that day. She looked older, worn by years of regret, but her eyes held something new, a silent apology. We sat quietly, the years of silence filling the space between us. I'm proud of you, Marcus, she finally said, voice thick. For a moment, I saw the scared little boy inside her, someone who did her best, despite her flaws. I reached out, taking her hand. It wasn't about erasing the past, but choosing peace. Life had come full circle. I was no longer that boy trapped in poverty and mockery. I was a man who had risen, fallen, and risen again. The future stretched before me, uncharted and vast. And for the first time, I was ready to walk into it. Not alone, but with the strength of everything I had overcome.